back to the Bitcoin Consciousness podcast, and here for round two, I have Red Tail Hawk. Red, how's it going tonight?
Going well, thank you. Good to be back.
Awesome, yeah, great to have you back, and I'm excited to get started. We ended the conversation last time with your disclaimer, and what are we going to start with next?
Well, I want to get into the science of reincarnation, and the reason for that is because after that, I want to get into the subject of ancient cataclysms, ancient apocalypse stuff, pole flips, and that subject has the potential to be a little bit doomy gloomy, so it's better to start off with a white pill with reincarnation.
All right, let's do it.
All right. Well, the University of Virginia's Medical School's Division of Perceptual Studies produced a significant amount of research on the subject of reincarnation. Their scope included other areas of focus ranging from the paranormal in general to things more adjacent to reincarnation, like near-death experiences. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a medical doctor, founded the research program before eventually handing it off to Dr. Jim Tucker, medical doctor, who headed the research program until he retired on January 1st of 2025. Dr. Stevenson's book, called Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect, contains dozens of example case studies. Interestingly, it's always kids between ages 2 and 8 who report past life memories. This is interesting because in 2015, a study called The Development of Theta and Alpha Neural Oscillations from ages 3 to 24 years. In that study, the researchers state, quote, critically, early childhood, ages 3 through 7, was characterized by a dominance of theta oscillations in posterior electrodes, whereas peak frequency of the dominant oscillation in the alpha range increased between ages 7 and 24. Furthermore, theta oscillations displayed a topographical transition from dominance in posterior electrodes in early childhood to anterior electrodes in adulthood. So theta dominant neural oscillation states are programming states, they're trance states, they're highly suggestive states, hypnotic states, they're highly receptive states. Rapid learning takes place from ages 2 to 8. This is our get up to speed on how people live here now phase. Parents who take advantage of this precious time period to self-educate and immerse their children in various activities will tend to see their children grow up to be prodigies more often, or at the very least, generally successful in their endeavors in life. As Plato said, give me the child until he is 7 and I will show you the man. The theta dominant phase of early childhood is extremely formative. Past life memories get reported between 2 and 8 years old, but theta waves are naturally present in kids up to 7 years. That 1 year discrepancy between 7 and 8 is likely explained by different age-keeping conventions. For example, in some places in India, newborns are said to be 1, as in they are in their first year. Mm-hmm. Right. This seems odd to most Westerners who don't call someone 1 until they have met and surpassed the 1 year mark. On the other hand, Westerners commonly refer to freshmen in medical school as first year med students. So there's some common ground for understanding that age counting convention. Dr. Stevenson was quite thorough in his work, having been the founder and director of the University of Virginia's Medical School's Division of Perceptual Studies. Dr. Stevenson was very aware of the kinds of tricks people's minds can play on themselves. He kept that in mind when performing his research on these case studies. He found plenty of reincarnation cases that were bogus, but he's found thousands that were legit, meaning many of them have been solved. A solved case is one in which the child's previous life's identity is confirmed through various accumulated evidence. These kids are never really claiming to be Cleopatra or Lao Tzu or anything kind of awesome like that. It's usually some random person from a village or town nearby. Sometimes the past life being remembered is the life of a family member or a spouse. Dr. Stevenson and his research teams were careful to avoid leading the witness, to
Right.
use courtroom parlance. They controlled variables like checking to see if the child's family had ever been in contact with the child's previous life's personality's family. They inquired into whether or not there were any news headlines about the child's previous personality's death that would have provided alternative avenues for information about the previous life's personality to have reached the subject experiencing the past life memories. When these doctors concluded that a case was quote unquote solved, it was because no other explanation sufficed to explain the facts presented.
Yeah.
As the title of the book suggests, the most fascinating aspect is how biology, or perhaps anatomy and reincarnation, intersect. Dr. Stevenson has noticed that both birthmarks and birth defects often, but not always, correspond to wounds known to have been inflicted upon the previous life's personality's
Wow.
body.
Wow.
Yeah, they've got a lot of them in there.
Mm-hmm.
These wounds were verified by informants' memories in some cases, but more significantly by medical records in other cases.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting because I've heard that too. Sorry to interrupt. I've heard that too. Like if you, people will have scars or like a mole. Like I have a mole here on my jaw. I've got a scar from chicken pox right here in between my eyes. And so I could imagine stuff like that could easily be, a fatal wound in another life. So.
Yeah, they found a lot of different things. They found some birthmarks that had correspondence to skin lesions, surgical wounds, as you said, moles or nevi, or I guess that's a related skin spot is a nevi,
Mm-hmm.
and other types of wounds or marks on deceased persons. And not all birthmarks necessarily have past life significance, according to Stevenson's work, but based on his work, it seems pretty undeniable that at least some birthmarks have past life significance. Stevenson doesn't deny the seeing is believing crowd their fix either. His book offers photographs of numerous birthmarks that were determined to have correspondence with wounds from the previous life. These ranged from knife wounds, bullet entry and exit wounds, shotgun spread wounds, mastoidectomy incision, a mark made on the deceased's elbow with charcoal, a birthmark corresponding to medicine that was spilled on the face in the previous life, a hairy nevus on the cheek corresponding to a punctured sebaceous cyst, a birthmark on the sole of the foot corresponding to a mark made with grease on the previous personality's body, and a birthmark on the buttock of someone who had a burn scar there in the previous life. Science knows of many reasons for various birth defects. Birth defects can arise due to smoking, drinking, or drug use by the mother during pregnancy, exposure to certain medications or chemicals during pregnancy, genetic or chromosomal factors, poorly controlled diabetes in the mother, and mothers that are over 35 years old. Science admits not knowing why all birth defects occur, though. So, again, according to Dr. Stevenson's research, it seems that at least some birth defects are best explained by some kind of past life incident. As an example, one boy lost his fingers in a fodder chopping machine in the previous life. In the next life, he was born with fingers that were severely malformed, underdeveloped, mangled, however you want to describe it. Another very similar case involved malformed fingers corresponding to amputation of fingers made with a sword during the previous life. Another boy was born with just a stub for a right ear and an underdeveloped right side of his face. In his previous life, he lost his life due to a shotgun blast to the head. Multiple case subjects had rope-like marks corresponding to a memory of having been tied up in the previous life. A number of cases featured multiple birthmarks, including gunshot wounds in which there was an entry and exit wound. There are dozens of case studies articulated in the book, so it's difficult to really do it all justice in a summary, but suffice to say, the material is compelling and worth the time to explore and inspect the evidence presented there. Another difficult to ignore piece of evidence on this subject is past life regression hypnosis. On a US Navy base in Texas in 1968, a doctor on base was having trouble with a patient who was suffering from an eating disorder. The doctor contacted a Navy man stationed on that base and his wife, who were both versed in hypnosis. What wound up happening was odd. The woman under hypnosis began responding as though she was a provocatively dressed and rebellious young woman from the 1920s, known at that time as a flapper in Chicago. The hypnotists, Johnny and Dolores Cannon, continued working with the patient for several months, during which time they explored 4 other past lives. Progress into the area of past life regression hypnotherapy stalled for the Cannons. Johnny was injured in a car accident at the end of the 1960s. The accident rendered Johnny a partial amputee, and they had children to raise, so Dolores focused on taking care of her family. When the kids were grown and launching their own adult lives, Dolores resumed practicing hypnosis with clients. As the aforementioned study stated, the human brain is in a theta neural oscillation dominant state from approximately 3 to 7 years old. Hypnosis affects neural oscillation patterns. The hypnotist will change their tone of voice to be very calm, very soothing, very smooth, etc. In a 2015 research paper called Brain Oscillations, Hypnosis, and Hypnotizability, the authors state that, quote, hypnosis has been most closely linked to power in the theta band and changes in gamma activity. These oscillations are thought to play a critical role in both the recording and recall of declarative memory and emotional limbic circuits. Here we propose that it is this role that may be the mechanistic link between theta and perhaps gamma oscillations and hypnosis, specifically that theta oscillations may facilitate and that changes in gamma activity observed with hypnosis may underlie some hypnotic responses. If these hypotheses are supported, they have important implications for both understanding the effects of hypnosis and for enhancing response to hypnotic treatments. So that's 2 major, that's end quote, by the way, that's 2 major pieces of evidence suggesting that theta dominant neural oscillation patterns are the key to unlocking past life memories. Children between the approximate ages of 3 and 7 years old are naturally in a theta dominant state. Hypnosis subjects are put into a theta dominant state. Both sets contain members who experience past life memories. So Dolores Cannon pioneered a lot of research into the area of past life regression hypnosis. Usually the past lives she explored with her patients were mundane, but occasionally something extremely interesting would come up, like a past life wherein the person personally witnessed Jesus or was a student of Nostradamus or had a past life on another planet. These people in their current incarnations typically were very ignorant of whatever subject they were able to speak about with scholastic accuracy while under hypnosis recalling this past life. Typically, people are unaware of what they say while under hypnosis during these sessions and must listen to playback of audio recordings in order to know.
And they're just blown away. They go, what? How do I know this?
Yeah, it's nuts. They speak languages that they don't speak. They know things about religious traditions that they've had zero exposure to. I
Yeah.
mean, and oftentimes these are very young people who have relatively limited experience compared to, say, someone who's in their 60s or 70s type of thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So they're tapping into some kind of some field. They're the field of infinite possibilities that the soul clearly has basically a mental construct of, right? Like there's because what it sounds like from a spiritual standpoint is that you come into this reality, your brain is in theta in which is like this the deepest fastest learning state that can possibly be, and then until you're about 7 years old, and then at which point then the mind kicks in. It's like, okay, I have absorbed all of this stuff and now I can kind of function mentally in the world. And so it's like there's some kind of there's this time of early on in life where you're just absorbing stuff, but then it switches to a mental grasp where you're using the mind, and so this mental structure seems to be being tapped into from there's like a barrier between all these mental structures, but the human mind constructs the language. There's it's all ultimately vibrational. Language is vibrational, and then the mind has taken the mind has taken those vibrations and transformed them into what does it sound like? How does it feel coming out? What does the language actually look like in practice? And there's some kind of barrier between, the mental constructs of each individual life. Whereas like when you're in theta, you don't really have those mental concepts so much. You're able to kind of bounce between fields. It's just like free jumping from puddle to puddle, kind of sounds like.
Theta is a very important neural oscillation pattern. I'm going to get into this more in other sessions, but it can do more than just tap into the Akashic records, the past life memory archives. It can do some pretty powerful things, and we'll just say that the Earth's natural resonance is a high theta band frequency.
Interesting.
So,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
So, I guess the YOLO crowd, the group of believers in the idea that you only live once, may be a bit surprised by hearing all of this information. They may not like this information, but they should probably check out the research for themselves before throwing stones at those who talk about it. For many people, being presented with the assertion that reincarnation is the truth means there are a number of other questions that would need to be answered. The obvious questions would be from adherents to the Abrahamic faiths, who tend to reject the doctrine of reincarnation, and specifically Christians, as reincarnation could be viewed as being in conflict with the concept of the resurrection. The short answers are that reincarnation does not necessarily have to conflict with the resurrection. And the reason that the Abrahamic faiths don't include reincarnation is, in my opinion, speculatively Rome. It was not in Rome's interests for people to believe that they reincarnate. People who know they reincarnate are more likely to bravely oppose the powers that be, which in this case would have been the Roman hegemons. If you believe YOLO, that you only live once, you're more likely to treat your one and only life with greater value due to scarcity. This kind of thing was not strictly a play from the Roman hegemon's playbook either. Persia did this with Shia Islam in response to Islamic expansion, replacing Zoroastrianism during the Arab expansion. At the risk of committing the argument from authority, logical fallacy, and instead offer bona fides, Giza Vermes, that's Gezavermes, was the first person to ever get a PhD in the subject of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Vermes said, quote, "The Dead Sea Scrolls have afforded, for the first time, direct insight into the creative literary-religious process at work within that variegated Judaism, which flourished during the last 2 centuries of quasi-national independence before the catastrophe of 70 CE or AD, forced the rabbinic successors of the Pharisees to attempt to create an orthodoxy by reducing dangerous multiplicity to a simple, tidy, and easily controllable unity." Centralization, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Vermes used this verbiage twice, once in the Dead Sea Scrolls 40 Years On from 1987, and again in the introduction of the Complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English from 1997. Rome's war on the Jewish people from 66 to 70 AD was conceivably an ideal Roman opportunity to centralize a variegated Judaism into one tidy, centralized, controllable unity, as Vermes said. It is reasonable to suggest that Rome's war on the Jewish people might have been launched, among other intended purposes, specifically to hijack Judaism through nefarious tactics like murder, bribery, etc., and ultimately gain control of the Jewish people by covertly controlling Jewish community leaders. If it's not unreasonable to suggest that Rome did that to the Jewish people, it shouldn't be unreasonable to suggest that Rome hijacked the Christ movement too. Rome wanted authority to be centralized. They wanted to keep power for themselves. Consider the phrase cui bono. Perhaps that wasn't just some random phrase that made its way down through the centuries. It means who benefits, right? Perhaps it was a significant governing credo of Romans' hegemons. Like, let's put ourselves into the perspective of the Roman hegemons. Who is more controllable for us as Roman hegemons? People who believe you only live once, or people who believe in respawning like it's a video game? Obviously, the YOLO crowd is easier to control. If lifetimes are known to not be scarce, people might not play it safe and cower to the power of Rome. The reincarnation subject is, again, really good to cover immediately for multiple reasons. Dogmatists are going to abandon the content early, and frankly, it's probably better that they check out. For the rest, the ancient apocalypse topic could easily be regarded as morbid or a bit doomy and gloomy. Reincarnation is a good white pill to swallow in advance of that topic. There's nothing to fear, including death. Don't be discouraged by the potential for cataclysms occurring within your or your loved ones' lifetimes. Take a lesson from sports and play hard until the final whistle.
Yeah.
So that's it on reincarnation. Beyond that, I was going to try and get into some interesting stuff that pertains to like the topic of ancient apocalypses.
Cool. Yeah. Maybe let's talk a little bit now. So, very well done. It's awesome to hear the official research that has been done on this. It's super interesting. And me having young kids, and my wife is open to these ideas as well. We always are kind of, not always, but we're open-minded to prodding and seeing like, do you remember anything from another life? And so far, the ones that can talk have not really. I mean, they've said some things here and there. Like my son, he talks about, being a part of another family, but then it seems to get kind of conflated with some of the experiences that he has already had or is currently living. So it could be, we're projecting on him too much or something, or it's just like he knows there's something there, but he just doesn't know how to tap into it, kind of thing. And my daughter, she's going to turn 3 tomorrow, actually. And so now she's like starting to get more conversational. It'll be interesting to hear from her as well as she gets older to see if there's anything.
That's good that you guys do that with them and bring up the possibility of experiencing past life memories.
Mhm.
I mean, I can't say with certainty, but I sure would be interested to see studies done on willing participants from the LGBT community
Mhm.
and find out whether or not, you know, they would experience any breakthroughs in past life regression hypnotherapy where they figured out that, I remember this. I had memories like this when I was like 4 years old or 5 years old. I just didn't know what to do with it. But now I'm experiencing the same memories in a past life regression hypnotherapy. And in those memories, I was the other gender from what I am now.
Mhm.
And that has, those memories have dictated the flow of my life in important ways
Right.
since then.
Yeah.
Like, imagine the sort of chasm that is created by, dogmatic beliefs that are antithetical to this, and how how much
Yeah.
that has changed many, many lives.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And it almost feels like taboo, at least in American culture, to talk about having other lives. Like it's even though there are religions around the world that still accept this idea. I mean, Hindus believe in reincarnation, Buddhism. I know that those are two major religions, and maybe you mentioned that in your presentation. But so for a group of people currently living, these ideas are not at all foreign, and I think that it has so many implications for the way that we live our lives, because it's now my understanding that our past lives, because time really isn't linear as we perceive it to be, so it's really concurrent lives. Our concurrent lives have just as much to do with our health, our experience in this reality, as anything else. So when you run into health problems, for example, the first thing that we're taught to be normal is that you run to a hospital, you run to a doctor. How do you fix this chronic condition? But instead, these things are just in your vibrational field in this current life and in others. And so there is a massive amount of power in shifting to that mindset versus, oh, these problems are outside of me. These problems are something that I cannot control. But instead, these problems are you. Maybe not even in this life, but these are things. Perhaps this life could be, let's say, like a safe haven. Here, you have all of your Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have all those needs met. So you're able to reach into that other life and solve some of those vibrational issues and help yourself in that other life. And therefore, then you'll see those consequences, because maybe you'll have some of these health problems, taken care of because you're working on them vibrationally. So I think we are so limited in the way that we see the world, even just strictly having the widely accepted belief that this is it, that we are born here, God put us here, He's testing us out this one life, and then you're done. It's so limited that it really can completely change the way people live their lives.
Yeah, I mean, do you ever see Buddhists or Hindus going to war?
Right. Right.
I don't I don't tend to see religiously motivated violence coming from Hindus and Buddhists.
Yeah.
It's not which is not to say that they've been involved in wars before, but that's
Hmm.
more of a function of the fact that it only takes one vote for two groups of people to be at war, and that's the attacker's vote, right?
Yeah.
If
Right.
so, yeah, I think that there is a lot there's a lot more peace in the reincarnation camps
Right.
than I think there is in the YOLO camps.
And what's interesting about that too is that some might argue that's like, well, in that specific example, some might argue that, well, these people aren't YOLOing, so it's like, screw it, why not? Why not attack? Why not blow everything up? But instead, you're right, like the religious wars are not, I think the mindset, and that's because the mindset then becomes, well, clearly I'm here to learn something. Like I came here, it's almost like some level of self-responsibility, right? Because you can kind of begin to assume that if I'm living multiple lives, there's definitely clearly a reason for it. And the most logical next step is to assume that everybody is choosing to live each one of their own lives. And so instead of going to war, blowing myself up, what is the lesson that I'm here to learn? I don't want to start over and forget everything. Like I'm at a good place now where I'm understanding all of this. What is it that I'm here to learn? I don't want to risk that. So, yeah, that's interesting. Whereas, like, in terms of Christianity, a religion that believes in just one life, there can be so much bad, which is justified, which is like, hey, listen, the perspective of a Christian, like maybe very, very, very radical, might be, listen, if you do not accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you are going to die, and your everlasting soul will be sent to burn in hell forever.
That escalated quickly.
Right, exactly. Like, I have to save you. Like, God has charged me with saving you. I have no choice here. And so a lot of justified, horrible things have happened. I mean, and this is what we're taught in school anyway, is that when we colonized the United States, that was a big part of taking over the Native American population. It's like, all these people are all doomed to hell. We have to convert them, because if we don't do it now in this life, they are going to burn forever, So it's a very different way to look at the world and look at your life.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, honestly. I think you tapped in at one point to a line of nuance that I parse, where I don't want to die, not because I'm afraid, but because I think it would be unwise.
Right.
For the exact reason you said. I don't want to have to reboot and start over and wipe the slate clean and rebuild everything that I've already built up into my mind so far in this lifetime. I think I can do a lot more, positive work for this planet in the remaining, 40 years I have left, as opposed to, stepping out off the sidewalk, not paying attention, and running into a 3-ton gravel truck. Like, that's just not going to be nearly as beneficial to anyone. So, yeah, I agree with that entirely.
Yeah, and if you play around with this idea of vibrational fields that we were talking about before, you can kind of look at least when they are in, let's just pretend the time is linear for a second. So when you go from life to life, what you're doing is you're like, you could look at it like you're building these vibrational fields of your own internal evolution, and you're taking them from life to life. And because these fields are what you are actually creating in your own reality, what you're actually manifesting, your life evolves with every experience. And so my theory, and again, I'm trying to just entertain thoughts but not necessarily accept them, but my theory is that the reason that we start over with a clean slate is because at a certain point in our lives, at this point in our evolution of humanity, is we still lack so much the understanding, and we still have so much fear that these programs build themselves sort of into like a cancerous loop, you could say, that it's like this programming, you're almost too far gone at this point. Like you need a reset. You need to erase some of this mental programming, because it's just kind of looping on itself. Like you have these vibrations that need to be reapproached from a fresh slate. from a younger body to question things again. Because at this point, because crotchety old people that just hate the world. They're really mad about everything, and it's just like you can't do anything to help those people because they just blame the world for everything. It's like, oh, it used to be so much better and I can't change it and I'm dying, I'm getting old. Like they have no desire to reapproach some of these things. So I think that's my theory, is that at this stage in humanity's evolution, we just like kind of get lost in all of it, and we need that like mental model reset and that fresh life to allow ourselves to integrate some of those vibrational changes that happen throughout our lives.
I think that's a good insight. I think that Dolores Cannon's response would be, it wouldn't be a test if you went into it knowing the answers already. Mm-hmm. So having the memory wipe serves in that regard. And I guess sort of consistent with that, the law of one, also known as the Ra material, Ra talks about how the introduction of the veil of forgetting allowed for us here in this density or dimension or plane, whatever, they use the word density pretty frequently in that material. Having us pass through that veil of forgetting allows us to polarize a lot more efficiently in this density.
Yeah.
And the two polarities are basically service to others, or your good, or service to self. Excessively, though, like some amount of service to self is baked in, right? You have to keep yourself ticking, and tick tock, next block, right? You got to keep rolling forward. Right. So there's some amount of maintenance necessary, but ideally, those on the good path are dedicating more than half of their efforts, their energy, their choices, their thoughts, etc., towards service to others.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Those are the two polarities, though, and apparently going into it with our memories wiped it makes polarization more efficient as a process, which that kind of lines up with what Dolores Cannon was saying about, it wouldn't be a test if you walked in knowing the answers.
Right. So effectively, if I was to come in, if I had a life where I was living very dark, I was living very service to self, I have an opportunity in the next life to reset and live in service to others.
If you fail to sort of be harvestable along the negative path, which according to the law of one, minimum threshold for harvestability is like 95% of your choices, energies, thoughts, actions, etc., are dedicated towards service to the self. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people wind up in the middle between 50% service to others and 95% service to self. Mm-hmm. So that 45% in the middle is the, non-graduating class that will recycle and live through another one, right, of at least another life until they achieve enlightenment on one of the two paths.
Interesting. I read a book in the why can't I think of the name of it right now? Anyway, there's a series of books by a guy who I think he's in Romania, and the first book was super interesting. It was about how he met this Freemason, and they found like an ancient ark of a bunch of material from extraterrestrial civilizations that had basically been put there for when humanity's ready. And then in the next book, he met Radu Cinemar is the I believe the author's name, Radu Cinemar. And I'll see if I can find the name of this particular book that I'm talking about. So in the second book, he meets a guy who had been alive for like 2,000 years or something like that. So he, his vibrations and his field were such that he wasn't aging. He had figured out through either his own life or through teachers. I think maybe some teachers had helped him through, how to basically not age. And I invite anybody to genuinely sit with that idea and just like, it's sort of like playing the game, what if you won the lottery? What would you do if you won the lottery? And I would recommend having the same exercise. Like, if you knew that you were going to live for at least 2,000 years, how would you live differently? Like, how would life be different? And strangely enough, one thing that I considered is I was like, I would probably get rid of all my TVs, which is so weird, right? Because you would think if I'm going to live a long time, I'm going to watch a bunch of TV. I'm going to waste all this time. But ultimately, I think the reason that I feel that way is because life's becomes so much grander and becomes so much more exciting to explore. It's like, man, there's so much out there that I just want to do now. Which is completely backwards from the limited experience. It should be like, if I'm only living 100 years in this life, then I should be living it up, right? But instead, yeah, I don't know. That's how I felt when I kind of played that exercise out in my head.
That makes a lot of sense. One would probably want to go out and try and learn everything one could, become as much of a, a multi-threat, so to speak, right? Like a 5-tool player in baseball or whatever, where you just pick up all the skills and learn all the things, and you become completely self-sufficient or capable of doing anything you need to do. You gain masses of knowledge, masses of wealth. But yeah, you're right. It is kind of backwards from the way things are, which kind of reminds me, like, on the reincarnation and YOLO line, and then like the war peace tendencies, you'd think the YOLO people would be like, oh no, we shouldn't go to war. I only get one life. That would be wasteful. I'm not gonna burn my life on violence against my neighbors when I'm being taught to love my neighbors as myself. That's completely antithetical to what I believe. And yet it's the people who believe in reincarnation, you'd think would be like, oh well, whatever, I'll respawn. Let me just go, kamikaze my way at the Maoist revolution and whatever. Like, I guess there's some examples of stuff like that, but they seem to be few and far between compared to things like, all the wars that we've seen from the Abrahamic faiths.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating how something so. And I think the reason that you approached it the way that you did, where you had to approach it from a very scientific point, it's like, here are these examples of people who have done studies on reincarnation, and they have been verified, they've been found to be very credible, is, again, in modern quote-unquote science, that essentially this is it, like, this was all random, this was just a one in trillions and trillion chance that we all just evolved into this place, and you extrapolate what that means to you, but ultimately we know what that means. We know that basically life is a lot less significant than the opposite, with a reincarnation mindset, the spiritually based mindset instead of the scientific one.
Right. It doesn't necessarily devalue one's life. If anything, like you said, we're here for a reason, every single one of us. And those reasons may vary from person to person, from polarity to polarity, or, for example, there are entities that are from the other side who choose to come down here and incarnate in the flesh, which is kind of a cowboy move, because they're risking getting swept back up in the wheel of karma and sort of getting stuck here in a reincarnation loop and not getting back out to the other side. Arguably, this is what Jesus was in different settings. They have different words for this. Some call them star seeds. In the Law of One, they call them wanderers, etc. But apparently, you may not even be actually pioneering this life. I may not be pioneering this life. We may be on the other side, jacked into the Akashic Records matrix, where we are experiencing what is called an imprint, which is kind of like checking a life out from a library and then living that life and experiencing everything that it has to offer, emotions, sensory inputs, everything.
Right.
So as far as your whole like time isn't linear thing, right? Exactly, and that gets into multiple pieces of content that I have probably way better articulated in my presentation notes down the line about how, you know, time and light are related to one another. Like as you approach light speed, time dilates. So I think that there's something to be said about that, and sort of the other side. But
Yeah.
again, it's a complicated topic that I probably cannot wrap off the top of my head
Sure,
because
sure.
there's
No.
too many things floating through my head at once.
Yeah. Well, I guess since you brought that up, so Joe Dispenza, you've heard of Joe Dispenza, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. So Joe Dispenza, in his book Becoming
becoming
Supernatural.
supernatural.
Yep. In that one, he talks about time and he defines it that in terms of space. So he basically says that without space, there is no time, right? So because ultimately what time actually is when is it has to do something with basically observing something from point A to point B. So even like I guess maybe when you stop and you're perfectly still, you don't necessarily observe time, but if you're watching a clock, you know, there are things that are physically moving from point A to point B to make time be a thing, or the earth itself is moving, for instance. You know, this is the space is what creates time. But then when you get into the electromagnetic level, which is the speed of light, that's when things start to get weird. You know, it's like when you get to the speed of light where space really isn't an issue for light. That's when that's when time becomes questionable. And so in the three-dimensional reality where we can't see light and we don't experience light with our five senses, you know, we experience time. However, when you go into, you know, higher vibrations where you are experiencing something different than the five senses, when you're experiencing vibrations and fields, you know, things that are actually instantaneous or near instantaneous, I guess, that don't have the limitation of space, that's when things also start to get weird, you know, and you can see into the future and you can see we have cases of like remote viewing and stuff like that.
Exactly. The remote viewing research that I'm going to talk about at some point in this content, not today. Other than this, the CIA's research on that subject, there was a guy, Itzhak Bentov, who was quoted more often than even Robert Monroe. And the Monroe Institute is like the place to go for remote viewing training. Right. And Bentov was quoted more often than Monroe. So Bentov is a person of interest. And in his book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum on the Mechanics of Consciousness, which I've got multiple quotes lined up for us from that, he does talk about how you can try and sort of break out of the flow of time with your mind, with your consciousness. And, you know, part of that is like actually trying to focus on the second hand of a moving clock kind of a thing, and almost shifting the time-space axes so that instead of being horizontal and perpendicular, you get a little bit of an angle in there. You can sort of work with that angle and play with it, and you start getting outside of the construct kind of a thing.
Wow, super cool. Okay, anything else you want to add, or you want to keep going?
We can get into the ancient apocalypse stuff.
Okay.
It would probably be appropriate to briefly discuss classification of a couple of documents by U.S. intelligence agencies and the U.S. military. While they might classify documents of no significance or import, it seems unlikely.
Right. Yeah, so classification adds legitimacy.
But highly likely to be legitimate, in my opinion. It's probably one of the least controversial places to look for legitimacy. So 2 books about ancient cataclysms were once classified, one or contained classified information. One book is called World in Peril by Ken White, which is about the origin, mission, and scientific findings of the 46th 72nd Reconnaissance Squadron of the U.S. Air Force. The other book that was formerly classified is called The Adam and Eve Story by Chan Thomas. The classification of World in Peril and of Chan Thomas's Adam and Eve Story is debated. A World in Peril covers itself in that particular matter, so it's perhaps not as contentious. It points out that the scientists involved in the research back in the 1940s and 1950s actually agreed on 2 points. It was ethical to release the information, but given the information, they were unable to imagine how to release it, fearing its release might have grave consequences in society. In World in Peril, they point out that the information wound up getting leaked anyways in the 1950s in a newspaper and magazine, but there was no real stir caused about it. It seems that anyone who actually did read about it in either publication was too incredulous, parochial, or apathetic to the matter to do anything about it.
What do you know, or maybe you're going to get into, what was the information that was published, you said, in a newspaper in question?
A newspaper and a magazine. Yeah, there was information related to this research, which is what I'm going to generally cover. I don't actually know what papers or magazines it was released in. I haven't seen the actual scripts from them or anything like that. I'd probably have to go.
If we can find them.
I probably have to go look in like microfiche at the library or something in order to find that. That's doubtful to even be on the internet.
Yeah.
Now, recent guest of Tucker Carlson is AJ, the host of the Y-Files. He did an episode of his YouTube channel, the Y-Files, on Chan Thomas. And according to that episode, Thomas released the first version of his book in 1966, which was immediately classified by the CIA. The book was classified along with an inter-office memo for some tools and car parts and a folded article from People magazine, which is kind of weird. It kind of makes me wonder if that article was from the 50s and it was the one about this stuff. But the inter-office memo about tools and car parts is kind of weird. Now, Chan Thomas was a polymath engineer who worked for a major aerospace contractor, and as an engineer was assigned by that contractor to work on ARPA projects. That's ARPA, the Advanced Research Project Agency, not to be confused with DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. This means that Thomas was working on top secret research projects and had top clearances prior to 1972 when ARPA became DARPA. If anyone has ever seen the movie The Expendables 3 with UFC legend Ronda Rousey amongst other stars, one of the Expendables recruits is a DARPA soldier, and he had all the really cool tech in that movie. Mm-hmm. And while that movie was fictitious, the general notion that DARPA has top secret tech and knowledge was accurate.
Widely accepted.
As a real world example, the internet was originally called ARPANET. The YouTube channel called the Y-Files, again, did an episode on Chan Thomas and his book and failed to assess the book properly, in my opinion. The host's articulation of the pole shift mechanism betrayed his lack of understanding and their coverage of Thomas's book. While decent and mostly accurate, failed to acknowledge that World in Peril even exists, let alone the fact that it corroborates Thomas's work. Professor Charles Hapgood's book, The Earth's Shifting Crust, also corroborates Thomas's work. Other works, like Dolores Cannon's Nostradamus books, do too. But material based on classified U.S. Air Force documents is perhaps the least controversial and warrants mention in a presentation like that. The host of the Y-Files said 5 minutes and 2 seconds into the video, quote, Thomas says that when the pole shift happens, The Earth's air and water continue to spin, but the land masses stop, end quote. That's not at all what Thomas's work describes. This suggests that the Earth's land mass will all of a sudden cease to possess the rotational momentum that it already had, after which a huge force would act on the Earth's crust, causing it to displace and shift roughly 90 degrees, and then the Earth would somehow begin spinning again. That's not at all how that would work. Nowhere is it a requirement that only one force acts upon the crust at a time. Essentially, the crust has rotational inertia to keep it spinning west to east, like normal. However, along with that rotational inertia to keep it spinning west to east, like normal, you would have a net torque acting upon the crust due to the unevenly distributed landmass on the Earth's surface. So normally there would just be the rotational inertia, but for a few hours or so, there are two major forces acting upon the crust. The Earth still spins during that time. It just also is spinning on a second vector. So scientific findings show that the dating of ice core samples from the poles are in conflict with the pole flip hypothesis that I'm going to lay out. Being too ignorant of the dating methods used to debate the people who perform them, the layperson may wonder how dependent those results are upon other assumptions. Would their results vary if, as they performed their dating work, they did so with the pole flip hypothesis in mind? The Kolbrin, that's Kolbrin, offers insights into this, saying, quote, "Men see in events the things they wish to see. They can interpret only according to their understanding," end quote. Alternatively, men see in events the things they expect to see. The default narrative taints scientists' expectations and interpretations of the experiments they've designed and executed. If the default narrative is distorted in some way, how much does that affect the outcomes? The hypothesis offered by Professor Charles Hapgood, by Ken White, and by Chan Thomas seems to be backed up by a ton of evidence. So it's fair to probe deeper into the dating methods that produce results that stand to undermine the pole flip hypothesis. It's important for Occam's razor to be involved in instances like this. If one accepts this hypothesis, the number of unknowns in one's personal understanding of everything is X. If one rejects this hypothesis, the number of unknowns in one's personal understanding of everything is Y. It's important for people to ask themselves, is X greater than Y or is Y greater than X? The pole flip hypothesis rationally explains dozens upon dozens of earthly mysteries, many of which are otherwise seemingly inexplicable, e.g., punctuated equilibrium's correspondence with stratigraphic layers. As such, it is reasonable to question whether or not the evidence against the pole flip hypothesis is even valid in the first place. People figure out truth sometimes. Very often that work gets rejected. Perhaps more often, bad science gets propagated as truth. We had a recent example of this in 2020. There was the PCR test.
Yep.
The PCR test issue really vindicated the default stance of science, which is skepticism. There was a story published on June 4th of 2020 by the New York Times about a study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. In their own words from their own website, the New England Journal of Medicine is, quote, recognized as the world's leading medical journal and website. Published continuously for over 200 years, the New England Journal of Medicine delivers high-quality, peer-reviewed research and interactive clinical content to physicians, educators, researchers, and the global medical community. This article's headline was, quote, "Malaria drug promoted by Trump did not prevent COVID infections, study finds," end quote. The headline from the New England Journal of Medicine read, quote, "A randomized trial of hydroxychloroquine as post-exposure prophylaxis for COVID-19," end quote. We'll circle back to this study soon. The goal is not to elaborate at length here. Certainly, this articulation will be devoid of some pedantic levels of technical nuance. So those listeners with deeper knowledge on this subject, please take this with a grain of salt and know that this is targeted to the 80% in the middle, not the 10% at the top or bottom. The following is not medical advice, nor was it written by a licensed medical professional. Having said that, if consulted, medical professionals are also unlikely to correct it. All viruses do is replicate. Stop that, and you win. Scientific research from 2019 and 2010, from before COVID-19 became all politicized, shows, interestingly, that in cell culture studies, high zinc ion concentrations, that's Zn2+, and the addition of compounds that stimulate cellular import of zinc ions, commonly referred to as zinc ionophores, were found to inhibit the replication of various RNA viruses, including influenza virus, respiratory syncytial, I don't know how to say that word, virus, and several picorna viruses. Although these previous studies provided limited mechanistic information, this suggests that intracellular Zn2+ or zinc ion levels affect a common step in the replicative cycle of these viruses. Now, it's well known to many doctors that hydroxychloroquine, or HCQ, is a zinc ionophore. It's actually been known in some capacity for a very long time, as evidenced by the trope of the sailor who drinks gin and tonics with a lime wedge. So not only did the vitamin C from the limes help sailors stave off scurvy, limes are also high in zinc. And tonic water is flavored using quina bark. It's Quina, aka cinchona bark, Cinchona. Now, quina bark derivatives are often zinc ionophores. Zinc ionophore activity has been shown in the alkaloid quinine and its chloroquine derivatives. Quinine is present in tonic water, and chloroquine is basically the beginning of hydroxychloroquine. So that June of 2020 study that concluded that hydroxychloroquine was not effective at treating COVID-19 issued a white paper. Anyone inspecting that white paper could leverage the benefits of modern technology by typing Control+F on their keyboard to search for the word zinc. Anyone who does so will find 0 instances of the word zinc in that white paper. Now, it's one thing for some researchers to make an honest mistake. It's another thing entirely for, quote, the world's leading medical journal, end quote, to publish it, and for the, quote, newspaper of record, end quote, to tout the work on the same day in lockstep. Now, the world's largest convicted financial criminal to date, Sam Bankman-Fried, was the CEO of the infamous FTX crypto exchange that blew up in late 2022. They rug pulled billions of dollars from their depositors. They also funded a bunch of politicians, which is icky, but perhaps worse is the bad science they helped fund. Social media users have spotlighted FTX's involvement with the Together trial, a privately funded international research consortium conducting clinical trials to test existing drugs as treatments for various conditions, including COVID-19. Edward Mills, co-principal investigator of the Together trial, told Reuters by email that, quote, no funding was received from FTX prior to May of 2022. Now, one could choose to believe that no transaction took place between the largest convicted financial criminal of all time and a bogus study on the effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine, as described by the recipient party when pressed on the matter in November of 2022. Mm-hmm. Given the facts presented, it seems unreasonable to believe either party. One rug pulled billions of dollars and lied for years. The other produced bunk science without committing logical fallacies like poisoning the well or relying upon ad hominem attacks. It is reasonable to doubt what either of them says.
100%. Yeah.
I mean, both parties have violated the trust of the public, which makes it reasonable to err on the side that suspects they're hiding more than just the crimes for which they were caught and imprisoned. Mills could even be right at a technical, superficial level, but would you really be surprised to find that money made its way from Sam Bankman-Fried's or FTX's coffers into the coffers of the Together trial long before May of 2022? I mean, given all the shenanigans, it seems more reasonable and fair to approach things they've said with greater skepticism than one might normally. So that study's white paper was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The Journal of the American Medical Association is a peer-reviewed medical journal published 48 times a year by the American Medical Association. It publishes original research, reviews, and editorials covering all aspects of biomedicine. The journal was established in 1883, so it's been around over 140 years. The study, like the one published by the New England Journal of Medicine around the same time, when Control F searched for the word zinc, produces 0 instances. Well, technically speaking, the COVID-19 zinc example is a red herring that does not directly address evidence against the pole flip hypothesis. It does highlight corruption in science, and that's the point.
Right.
There are probably numerous examples of corruption in science that illustrate the point. A lot of science funding comes from suspect channels and sources with strings attached. Some science is most likely even funded for disinformation or misinformation purposes by people who are incentivized to push lies out into the public. With that in mind, it doesn't seem all that unreasonable to suggest that a lot of scientific dating work is bogus and in need of revision. The pole flip hypothesis does a much better job of explaining things that would still demand explanation if we reject it. The pole flip hypothesis likely has some counter data out there serving as evidence against it as a hypothesis. Ideally, specialists with greater knowledge in certain scientific dating techniques and other forms of applicable science could help provide some clarity and potentially invalidate those dating data points that stand in contradiction to the pole flip hypothesis. Some might call that confirmation bias, but perhaps by the end of this section, they will change their mind. So when discussing the subject of ancient apocalypses, the name Graham Hancock is likely to be invoked. Graham is no stranger to the Earth crust displacement theory, as he has written extensively about the work of Professor Charles Hapgood. In fact, Graham's very first chapter of his book, Fingerprints of the Gods, The Evidence of Earth's Lost Civilization, covers Hapgood's theory. Albert Einstein was one of the first to realize the profundity of Hapgood's thesis, even writing the foreword for Hapgood's book. Einstein said of Hapgood's work, quote, I frequently It goes without saying that these ideas are very seldom possessed of scientific validity. The very first communication, however, that I received from Mr. Hapgood electrified me. His idea is original, of great simplicity, and if it continues to prove itself, of great importance in everything that is related to the history of the Earth's surface, end quote. Einstein's summary of Hapgood's findings states that in a polar region, there is continual deposition of ice, which is not symmetrically distributed about the pole. The Earth's rotation acts on these unsymmetrically deposited masses and produces centrifugal momentum that is transmitted to the rigid crust of the Earth. The constantly increasing centrifugal momentum produced in this way will, when it has reached a certain point, produce a movement of the Earth's crust over the rest of the Earth's body. The Wright brothers' first flight in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina happened in 1903. World War I took place about a decade later. A couple decades of refinement in aviation technology led to the addition of air forces to national militaries before World War II featured those air forces in a big way. Then the war was over in 1945. National air forces had all these men and airplanes, but no war to fight. Well, if you have manpower and tools, it would be wasteful not to put them to good use, and that's what happened. According to Ken White's book, World in Peril, the US Air Force started doing some avionic exploration of the magnetic North Pole and noticed wonky compass readings. They found that there wasn't just one magnetic North Pole, but rather three within an area the size of Montana, which is not quite 150,000 square miles. One pole was determined to be the primary pole. At that time, it was located on the northwestern shore of Prince of Wales Island. The other two poles apparently formed the foci of the elliptical region, like the center of the ellipse, and then like off to the sides are the foci, right?
Yep. Yeah, so like if you were to take a string and like use the string to draw, it's the two. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly. You remember your quadratics from Algebra 2.
Carpentry, actually. We were drawing an arch, and I was like, how do we... And yeah, I basically built the formula from scratch. So it was fun. It was fun to like reapply something that I learned in geometry.
Working in the construction industry, I was talking about... I was with my boss at a certain point, the use of oval-shaped duct,
yeah,
for duct risers going up through buildings,
yeah,
like from floor to floor. And he was like, "Yeah, we don't ever design risers with oval duct." I said, "Why not?" Yeah. He said, "Because guys don't like cutting oval holes. That's a pain in the butt."
Yeah, right.
I said, "Yeah, that's a good point. If I ever walked up to a general foreman on a job site and was like, 'Oh, you just need to find the two foci,' I would instantly hang my head knowing that he's about to tell me to foci off."
Exactly. Nice. Okay, so before I interrupted you, so the main, or one of the poles, is like one pole stronger than the other two, or?
Yeah, the primary pole is, I think, the strongest. As for the two foci, I don't know that one is necessarily much stronger than the other.
Okay.
If they are, it's probably negligible in the grand scheme of things.
And what year was this?
This was around, I guess that's one of my next sentences here. So one pole was located on Bathurst Island, mm-hmm. and the other was located on Boothia Peninsula. And on October 19th of 1947, mm-hmm. the U.S. Air Force announced the finding of the three magnetic North Poles. not long after that, a Canadian ground expedition produced extremely similar findings as stated in a letter dated July 21st, 1948 by R. Glenn Madill, M-A-D-I-L-L, Chief of Terrestrial Magnetism from the Department of Mines and Resources of Canada.
How are they finding the poles? Like, what kind of process do they have to go through to mark their location?
I mean, presumably you have to get to a point where your compass, you can walk around it,
right, okay.
and it's just always that way.
That was my exactly, that was my assumption as well. So the primary one was in the middle of the two foci,
Yeah.
or is in the middle of the two?
The primary was located on Prince of Wales Island, and the other two, the foci, were located on Bathurst Island, Bathurst, and the other on Boothia Peninsula, Boothia.
And these three are effectively all in a line, with the one in the middle.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, it was 1831 when the first observations of the magnetic North Pole were made. And the location of the magnetic North Pole remained relatively static on Boothia Peninsula until 1945. This discovery that the pole was on the northwestern shore of Prince of Wales Island meant that the magnetic North Pole had moved 165 miles closer to the geographic North Pole. They concluded that the movement of the magnetic North Pole was unpredictable, but it had been moving clearly in a north-northwesterly direction. And this led to many scientists asking a rather obvious question. What happens when the magnetic North Pole moves to coincide with the geographic North Pole? To answer this, the RAND Corporation developed and studied models of the Earth constructed out of concentric spheres. There was an inner sphere representing the electromagnetically charged molten iron core of the Earth, whose axis defined the magnetic poles, and an outer sphere representing the crust of the Earth, which rotated around a geographic polar axis. It was determined through repeated experimentation that as the magnetic pole approached the geographic pole, the magnetic pole would, at some point, accelerate its rate of convergence as though pulled towards the geographic pole by centripetal or center-seeking force, and jump to coincide. But instead of the poles coinciding, the magnetic pole would rapidly flip around the geographic pole, then spin off towards the equator, as though by centrifugal or center-fleeing force, ending up at a position where the two polar axes, geographic and magnetic, assumed an approximate 89-degree divergence, basically a right angle. So after this polar flip occurred, the axes would then gradually begin to reconverge over a long period of time. And this model offers viable answers to a number of mysteries on Earth begging answers. As each mystery is brought up, consumers of this content are encouraged to look these things up and verify that they exist for themselves. Most people don't know about most of these earthly mysteries. So for starters, why are there high elevation strata of mountain rock containing marine fossils? That's kind of weird. Also, why have beaches of sand formed from ocean wave action at 1,500 foot high altitudes in the mountains of Italy? Observations from around the globe show that almost all of the land masses of the Earth have been glaciated at some point in the past, including parts of Africa, India, and South America that are presently located on or near the equator. If global temperatures dropped to levels sufficient to glaciate even the equator at some time in the past, all life on Earth would have been destroyed. If, however, Africa, India, and South America, which are presently located in tropical locales, were ever located in geographic polar regions and later shifted to their present locations, the evidence of glaciation in these locations is not at all mysterious. Svalbard, that's Svalbard, formerly known as Spitsbergen, Spitzbergen, is an island well within the Arctic Circle that is now snow and icebound most of the year. Despite this, there is ample evidence that tropical corals once grew on the shores of the island. Spitsbergen also has considerable coal deposits that attest to the island's once temperate or tropical climate. Coal deposits are evidence of forestation in the past. Water lily fossils have been found at Svalbard, embedded in lignite, also confirming the island once had a warm and marshy environment. Perhaps the best piece of evidence, though, from Svalbard is the prehistoric frozen trees that were unearthed there that have no rings.
What?
Rings occur in trees due to seasons. So for a tree to have no rings, it must have grown in a location where there are no seasons. There's only one place on Earth that has no seasons, the equator.
Right.
It stands to reason that at some point in time, Svalbard was at or near the equator. There's a coral reef on the floor of the Arctic Ocean. Coral reefs form in warm, shallow, clear, tropical, and subtropical waters. There are two possible explanations for this. Either the whole Earth was once much warmer than it is now,
Right.
or the poles were previously in different locations relative to the Earth's crust.
Yeah, that location was warmer. I mean, regardless, that location had to have been warmer, whether it was the whole planet or just that part.
Right. Now, if the Earth was warmer on average by 10 degrees Celsius, the Arctic Ocean could have supported the growth of that coral reef. However, cold adapted species would have been wiped out, along with basically all marine life, meaning that it is more likely that the poles were previously in different locations relative to the Earth's crust. Then there's Admiral Byrd, who his 1933 to 1935 Antarctic expedition yielded the discovery of leaf stem imprints and fossilized wood under the snow and ice. Sir Ernest Shackleton found coal beds within 200 miles of the geographic South Pole. Both discoveries, and in particular Shackleton's coal beds, count as evidence of massive primeval forestation in Antarctica. Massive forestation does not occur in places where there are 6 months of darkness each year. Also found near the South Pole were the fossilized footprints of a prehistoric mammal-like reptile. Since reptiles are known to be cold-blooded and need the warmth of the environment to sustain their body heat, it is evident that the Antarctic did not always have a cold climate. There are cold-blooded species that can survive in cold environments through different specific adaptations. So it is possible that this prehistoric mammal-like reptile was such a species. It's also possible that this ancient life form was not native to the South Pole and was merely transported there by some kind of natural forces. An alternative viable explanation is that Antarctica has not always been located at the geographic South Pole. Then we have the New Siberian Islands, located about 200 miles off the northern coast of Siberia, which are almost literally composed of the bones and remains of multitudes of prehistoric mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant beavers the size of goats, prehistoric rhinoceros, buffalo, deer, horses, and other small mammals. How could so many of these animals that were also found throughout Siberia and Alaska be frozen intact within the ground in such a way that thousands of years later, their flesh, when thawed, was said to be edible. At one Russian scientist's banquet at the Moscow Academy of Sciences in the 1930s, the main course was mammoth steaks.
No way.
Another question is how the frozen tundra of northern Siberia and Alaska could have supported such large populations of prehistoric mammals, unless the Earth once had a much warmer climate or much warmer, cold-adapted species, and most marine life would have been wiped out. So it seems likely that Siberia and Alaska were once located somewhere with a warmer climate. Perhaps the most noted of the thousands of ancient animals found in that area was the Beresovka mammoth found near the Beresovka River in northern Siberia. It's Beresovka. Now, this mammoth had a pink skull due to hemorrhaging in the head, along with an erection, which shows that it suffocated to death in the surrounding homogeneous muck. Now, biologist Ivan T. Sanderson approached this discovery from a frozen foods vantage point. When you freeze meat, the problem is to freeze it fast enough so the moisture content contained in the meat doesn't have time to form large crystals while freezing. The faster the freeze, the smaller the crystals. If you freeze the meat too slowly, the moisture will form crystals large enough to destroy the fibrous structure of the meat, which, when defrosted, will be nothing more than a mass of goo, unfit to eat or cook. The larger the piece of meat to be frozen, the more difficult it is to freeze it fast enough. So the Beresovka mammoth was several tons when it was dissected in 1901 by Russian scientists. They recorded that even the innermost lining of the stomach had a perfectly preserved fibrous structure, indicating that his body heat had been removed by some super prodigious process in nature. So the American Frozen Foods Institute was consulted, and weeks later, they concluded it was impossible with all their engineering and scientific knowledge. Furthermore, they looked to nature and concluded there was no known process that could accomplish the feat. The American Frozen Foods Institute did say that the temperature would have had to have been lowered by about 140 degrees Fahrenheit or 78 degrees Celsius from its normal temperature. And it must be accomplished in an absolute outside time limit of approximately 4 hours.
Wow.
In reality, it needed to be more like 2 hours or less. Mm-hmm. And the Institute did not account for two factors. First, it wasn't just the Beresovka mammoth that was being frozen. It was the entire strata of muck in which the mammoth suffocated that was having heat removed from it. Second is the mammoth's erection, which was also frozen, which tells us that the entire strata of muck and at least the outer portions of the mammoth were frozen in about 1 minute, possibly less. Another couple points of interest about the Beresovka mammoth are the fact that one foreleg, some ribs, and its pelvis were fractured. Now, consider how strong a mammoth's leg bones and pelvic bone would have to be in order to support the weight of a body that weighs several tons. Also, the mammoth was found with frozen buttercups in its mouth. These facts indicate that something extremely violent and sudden happened to it while it was simply going about its day eating some food. Mm-hmm. Sticking to the topic of megafauna, there are footprints of dinosaurs imprinted in beds of exposed river mud that got frozen. like the Beresovka mammoth,
Yeah.
before the prints could deteriorate. These footprints remained frozen and were preserved for thousands of years. This gave time for the mud to ossify, allowing us to witness dinosaur footprints in rock beds today. Another curiosity of Earth is the apparent uninterrupted evolution on the Galapagos Islands over the last 11,000 years. Specifically, both the Malay Peninsula and the Galapagos are of interest, as both are now rife with lizard life. I mentioned earlier punctuated equilibrium, which is the idea that we typically see discontinuities in the evolutionary pattern for each species, with clear epochs distinguished by particular characteristics. For example, the New Siberian Islands previously mentioned had goat-sized beavers, yet now Earth has no goat-sized beavers. This indicates that something drastic happened to the global beaver population at one point. The apparent uninterrupted evolution on the Galapagos Islands and Malay Peninsula suggests that some places on Earth were significantly less impacted by such events. It is interesting to note that the Galapagos Islands and Malay Peninsula are almost exactly antipodal points, meaning they are almost exactly on the opposite side of the world from one another. There are huge granite blocks sitting on the eastern slopes of the Jura Mountains, Jura. It is well known that the Jura Mountains are non-granitic. Whatever granite exists in those mountains is still buried deep in them. These huge granitic blocks have been traced to the Swiss Alps across the Swiss Valley to the southeast, 50 to 80 miles away. What's really crazy is that these blocks sit at an altitude equivalent to the source altitude. Swiss geologist Arnold Escher von der Limpf and German geologist Leopold von Buch, among others, determined that fast-moving water could have accomplished this relocation of multi-ton granite boulders, but their work was dismissed because people couldn't fathom how water would move that fast. Graham Hancock, in Fingerprints of the Gods, The Evidence of Earth's Lost Civilization, leads off the book talking about the Piri-Reis map. That's P-I-R-I-R-E-I-S, 2 words. The Piri-Reis map is from 1513. And even though modern humans supposedly didn't discover Antarctica until January of 1820, Antarctica is shown on the Piri-Reis map. This is anachronistic and worthy of deeper inspection. Hancock writes, quote, "Conventional wisdom has it that the Antarctic ice cap in its present extent and form is millions of years old. On closer examination, this notion turns out to be seriously flawed, so seriously that we need not assume the map drawn by Admiral Piri-Reis depicts Queen Maud Land as it looked millions of years in the past. The best recent evidence suggests that Queen Maud Land and the neighboring regions shown on the map passed through a long ice-free period, which may not have come completely to an end until about 6,000 years ago. This evidence, which we shall touch upon again in the next chapter, liberates us from the burdensome task of explaining who or what had the technology to undertake an accurate survey of Antarctica in, say, 2 million BC, long before our own species came into existence. by the same token, since map making is a complex and civilized activity, you mentioned trigonometry earlier, right? It compels us to explain how such a task could have been accomplished even 6,000 years ago, well before the development of the first true civilizations recognized by historians. Keywords being civilizations recognized by
Yeah.
historians.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are the legends and myths. According to Chan Thomas, in Tierra del Fuego, at the southern tip of South America, there is the story of the day the sun set in the wrong direction. And in Peru, there's the story of the day the sun stood still. Thomas also points out that there are Malayan and Sumatran legends from tribal aborigines of what they called the long night. Now, in the Colburn's Book of Creation, chapter 3, it's called The Destruction and Recreation. It contains a cataclysm narrative involving a great flood or inundation. Summarizing the post-flood circumstances, it reads, quote, "Life was renewed, but it was different. Man survived, but he was not the same. The sun was not as it had been, and a moon had been taken away." This, end quote. This may be interpreted to mean that the course that the sun normally took through the sky was not the same as it was before, and that an evening's worth of the moon's presence, or one night, was taken away, lost, or in other words, was not experienced as was normally expected. Then, of course, there are the linguistic curiosities, like the similarity of languages the world over, from the family of Polynesian tongues to Greek to Egyptian to Mayan to Yakut to the Oriental family of languages and more. So I think that's kind of a good stopping point before putting forth the case that pole flip cataclysms are the explanation for all of these curiosities, and kind of getting into more of the science of it, what we think might be happening.
Sure, sure. So, and you're thinking that one for the next conversation.
Yeah.
Cool. Man, you covered a lot. So the first question that I had on the mammoth that was being eaten in the early 1900s?
Yeah.
That did they get any pictures of that or its dissection? Or are they available if so?
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty. I mean, we definitely had camera technology by that point in time. So, yeah. I mean, I haven't necessarily explored what is available in terms of, available photographs from that stuff. But yeah. I would guess that there is something to that effect. And wow. Even if there's not, we can still go today to the New Siberian Islands and check out its composition, or like there's the boneyard in Alaska. I think Joe Rogan has had on people who are like immersed in sort of that plot of land and digging into it and finding what all there's to be found there.
Mm-hmm. So these things are, I mean, they're more than just fossils. I mean, these are still yet frozen bodies of animals with organic material.
Yes. In some cases, apparently, perhaps not in all cases. I mean, they do find a bunch of bones. I think they call it the boneyard or whatever up there. So I'm sure there's quite a bit of stuff that has had an opportunity to decay, but yeah, for whatever reason, some spots were found where that was not the case.
So what's really interesting to me that I recently learned about fossils, and I guess I don't know how much truth this is, but this was in like a National Geographic. It was like a fossil digging kit that my 5-year-old had gotten, and there was a little book explaining what are fossils, what color were dinosaurs, and this kind of thing. And in the beginning of that little booklet, it explained that a fossil, generally, I guess, a fossil isn't actually a bone, but instead what a fossil is like the bone itself. It stays around long enough that like the earth around it will dry out and become a mold, like an injection mold. And then as that decays, a bunch of different, like a different slurry, liquid slurry will come in and fill and replace all of those holes. So a lot of fossils, if not all fossils, I don't know, are not actually bone, like containing DNA and all that kind of stuff, but instead it's just like an injection mold of of the dinosaur's frame. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder if like there's an osmosis of certain minerals from the surrounding earth into the bone while it's there,
Yeah, right.
and that maybe that like remains behind, and
Hmm.
like the actual bone material itself might eventually decay away, but like mineral deposits essentially sort of remain and take the shape of the bone, or like you said, some kind of seepage through the cracks or whatever fills it up
Right,
over time,
right.
and what you just wind up with is a rock that is
Yeah,
shaped like the
shaped like the
bone or
bone.
whatever.
Exactly. So you've heard something similar to that, where the fossils aren't necessarily the bone itself?
I mean, sometimes that's, I think, what they are. Obviously we do find bones and
Bones.
stuff,
Right.
so I don't know if they're doing like carbon dating on this stuff in order to try and
Yeah.
figure out what it is, because I don't think you can carbon date rocks as
Yeah,
far as
right.
I know.
Exactly. Because carbon dating has something to do with the half-life of carbon and the decay rate of carbon. So if but rocks don't decay. So interesting. So is now a good time to talk about that documentary that you had shared?
Oh, the recent one that Ben Davidson
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Ben Davidson is one of the more prominent voices on social media. I think he spends most of his time on X, on Twitter. But yeah, he recently released a documentary on this subject. He's got a YouTube channel. I think it's called Suspicious Observers. I think he also goes by the moniker of Sun Weatherman, and he is definitely a hardcore scientist. He's got a property out in, I want to say, southeastern Colorado, and actually, fellow Bitcoiner Tone Vase was featured near the end of
Yeah.
that documentary for maybe, I don't know, less than 10 minutes or so. But I didn't, I've played poker with Tone before. I didn't know he was aware of this.
Mhm.
I kind of wonder if he was aware of it when I was playing with him that one time
Right.
when he came through town. But
Crazy.
yeah,
Yeah, so that was a super interesting documentary, and the only I guess the only thing that I was a little bit just not necessarily skeptical, but just playing devil's advocate with is how they had the pole location data so far back. I mean, I think it was like early 1800s that they had that, but you had just said it when you were just explaining that, yeah, the earliest recorded location of the magnetic pole of the Earth was taken in what, like 1830 something?
yeah. So I guess to that point, shortly before World War II, geophysicists discovered a method of determining the location of rocks on the Earth's surface at the time they were formed relative to the North Magnetic Pole,
Mm,
beginning the study known as paleomagnetism, which produced some puzzling results. This new science showed that the magnetic North Pole had changed its location by thousands and even tens of thousands of miles hundreds of times
mm,
during the Earth's geological history, this meant one of two conclusions for scientists had to be true. Either the Earth's axis of rotation must have changed, which everyone found to be highly unlikely, or the crust drifts over time. And this is where the theory of continental drift arose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the way that the magnetic structure, I guess, underlying structure of the magnetic field of the Earth is separate from the crust. So the assumption is that underneath the crust, which we've never actually been, humans have never actually been through it, but the assumption is that underneath it is either a core that's like really small, or it's just crust, and then there's this big rotating, everything's floating basically over a giant mass of lava.
Yeah, so there's the solid core, which is, the spin of that core is known to be very much related to Earth's magnetic field. Okay. Then there is kind of the mantle, and the mantle is
underneath more the crust, right? That's the rock.
Yeah, it's between the crust, which we call the crust the lithosphere, which litho is rock, so it's the rock sphere, like you said. And then beneath that is something called the asthenosphere. The asthenosphere is about the same depth, generally speaking, as the crust. It's like a semi-fluid layer that yields to persistent stresses. The lithosphere, the crust, anywhere from 30 miles thick to 160, 170 miles thick. And yeah, again, beneath that is the asthenosphere, which is, again, a semi-fluid molten rock, and it will yield to persistent stresses. Now, in order for the crust, the entire crust, to shift, the viscosity of the asthenosphere would need to drop by like 17 or 20 orders of magnitudes. Like, that's a lot of decimal places that you're going to have to move. So something weird has to happen. And it could be a combination of multiple factors. I've got some ideas on what those could be, but according to Ben Davidson's work, he thinks that the geomagnetic excursion that, the U.S. Air Force noticed back in the 1940s is potentially one of those components. And, they have noted that the magnetosphere of the Earth, which is like where Earth's magnetic field interacts with solar weather. And it's like that magnetosphere, the strength of it has reduced by a significant amount. It's at least 10% down since however long, like hundreds of years ago. And they've noticed that the decline in the strength of the magnetosphere seems to be accelerating.
Right.
And in general, the thought process for Davidson is that there's a polarization sheet, or also known as a current sheet, that exists in space. And I guess it relates to the sun to some degree, but this polarization sheet, as the name would suggest, is kind of responsible for the polarization of our local area of space. And this polarization sheet has some kind of ripply areas in some fringy spots. And so when our area of space happens to be, whipping through those fringy areas, we go through these sort of reversal zones where, one would expect weirdness to happen with our magnetosphere like this. So it seems that we may be passing through one of those polarity reversal zones in the present era.
And he, in his documentary, he had said that it sounds like this could happen any time between now and 2050.
Yeah, I think Isaac Newton, in his work, estimated that something significant like this might happen by the year 2060.
Mm-hmm.
But like Baba Vanga, I think, is the name of I guess we'll call her a clairvoyant, a prophetess,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. She foresaw something happening within probably the next 20 to 30 years. I forget the exact date. I want to say it was in the 2040s, maybe 2045, something like that. Dolores Cannon, in her books, where she was able to get in contact with Nostradamus through various methods, talked about his quatrains, and one of the reasons he was interested in talking about them is because in order to get those quatrains to survive the Inquisition, he had to be cryptic in his language.
Right.
That's why people are so
People don't
interested.
Like him.
Right, because they don't know how to interpret what he's saying. It's too cryptic.
Yeah.
But he wanted to, since Dolores Cannon was doing this in the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc., we were well beyond the period of the Inquisition. Mm-hmm. And so he could, pass that football over the defensive line and the linebackers and get it to a wide receiver who's already cleared the secondary.
Yeah.
And so Dolores Cannon's work offered some different ideas. I want to say one of them was like 1929. Another one was like the year 2000 or something. They had different ideas. I want to say Edgar Cayce had some thoughts on this. The people who channeled the Law of One material kind of thought that the Mayan calendar, the winter solstice of 2012, might have had something to do with it. It's hard to say if it will happen again, if this is all correct, but there does seem to be a decent amount of consilience of various sources pointing at this. Mm-hmm. Even the Law of One in 1981 talked about how the transition would be approximately 30 more years. Well, that's 2011.
Yeah.
If this thing is happening on a roughly 6,000 year cycle or 12,000 years for like the more devastating versions of these events, then that actually lines up really well with the precession of the Earth's axis, which carves out like a conical space every 25,772 years. Mm-hmm. So you break that in half, and you're looking at what, 12,000, 12.5, 12.8, something like that. Mm-hmm. You cut the precession into quarters, and I think it's like 6,443 years, something like that.
Right.
So that's pretty close to being on that 6,000 and 12,000 year timeline that Davidson was talking about. Yeah. And it kind of makes sense to me, according to the Law of One material, the sort of chapter of Earth's development was that we were exiting with the Mayan calendar thing in 2012 and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It consists of 3 precessions of the Earth's axis, which is like 77-ish thousand years. So on the order of 77,000 years to be off by like a year and 20 months.
Yeah.
That's a red bullseye to
me.
Yeah. That's a gimme putt in golfers' parlance. So I think that the Mayans were onto something with that long count, and the raw material, the Law of One, seems to offer that some affirmation.
Right. That's fascinating. So So then the geographic pole is going to be basically the center of that the base of the cone. Is that what's considered the geographic pole?
I think the center of the cone would be at the center of the Earth, maybe,
Right. This well the
and
base,
then
right, exactly. But then the base of the
the,
cone. So the
it
center of that is that the geographic pole?
the geographic poles define, like, if you took the cone, the conic section, and sliced it
Yeah.
at a distance of the Earth's radius away from the center of the Earth,
Okay.
the pole would be on that racetrack,
Oh,
if you
okay.
will.
Yeah.
It would be the car that's riding around that racetrack.
Gotcha. Okay. So then so we don't really know the relationship between the geographic and the magnetic pole, I guess.
There seems to be an attraction between them
Yeah.
at this phase
Yeah.
of the geomagnetic excursion. There also seems to be an attraction after sort of the big events. This is according to the Rand Corporation's models, right? They
Mm-hmm.
said that at a certain point, the magnetic pole would get sucked into the geographic pole,
Mm-hmm.
but instead of converging, it would kind of bounce weirdly around it. And then eventually, wonk, it just flips out to the equator.
Mm-hmm.
But then on a longer timeline, they start to reconverge again.
Yeah. So, okay, so the crust basically, so the idea is that the crust would basically shift 90 degrees. So the poles would then would be spinning at the equator. Oh yeah, you can show me on the
Right. So let's say that this dot right here on my ocean jasper that's dark is like the Arctic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
then on the other side, there's our Antarctica, right? So here's us spinning right now, right?
Yeah.
And then what happens is those poles flip
Yep. And then it
out
starts
to
spinning that way.
the new equator, right?
Yeah.
Which offers all sorts of interesting connections, like, um, for example, the idea of ley lines.
Yeah.
What if those were just former equators that soaked up pure, undiluted, undeflected sunlight for like 6,000 years,
Right.
and were therefore imbued with some, a little extra something special?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, what's interesting is like I don't fear this. Like especially, having the um having the belief change in recent years to the reincarnation model. I mean, I think that this is if this is to happen, it is ultimately a part of our spiritual evolution. And actually, I think the Earth is could very well be going through a reincarnation cycle, just like we do. And it is, starting over in some regards. And, something that's interesting with a lot of Graham Hancock's work is he goes into some of the records of the people or the gods that would visit these ancient civilizations and that had been recorded. How these people would come from across the ocean and they would teach them how to farm and all this kind of stuff. It was like, certain individuals, they made it through and they were able to retain some of their knowledge, and then while other places of the earth around the earth had, I don't know, maybe forgotten things over time. Or it could be like here in the United States, for instance, imagine our society fracturing away from centralization. There's going to be very, very few people who can take care of themselves. And so the group of people that are able to effectively survive it, they're going to figure it out and go out and try to find other people and help other people, or they're just going to barely scrape by until somebody does come and help them. So it's going to be like it would be like an effective restart for them too. Yeah, so I mean, there's so many different stories that kind of fit with this whole idea, which is super
Oh
interesting.
yeah.
So then Davidson's location of his ranch, I'm assuming his thinking and his mathematics are hopefully that he is going to end up on the new equator, or high altitude with little water, with no flooding hopefully, and somewhere that's warm.
Yeah, scientists have cooked up models of this, and they've tried to figure out, based on the asymmetrically distributed land masses above water level on the Earth, what is the net torque bearing upon the lithosphere, and in what direction is it bearing? And based on that information, they are guessing how all of the tectonic plates would shift. And like in Chan Thomas's book, he recommended that people wanting to survive this, take shelter on the leeward side. That would be the eastern face of mountains, ideally far away from any oceans to the west. So the Rocky Mountains are a lot higher than any other mountain range in the US. Like, I think the Appalachian Mountains might be 1/3 as tall as the Rockies.
Yeah.
So I think by selecting the eastern face of the Rocky Mountains, he's trying to, get the best of both worlds with the highest elevation possible, and also getting, the shady side, the leeward side of the mountains.
Wow. Yeah. So it was a very interesting watch for sure. I think it was very well done, and it wasn't. I don't think it was like overly fearful or doomsday at all, and it wasn't like the only thing that was maybe a little bit you could consider to be what's the word, to have like an ulterior motive. It seemed like it was at one point like an ad to buy gold. There was like the sponsored by gold something, and I was like, okay, that. But it also makes sense too. Um, so it's like, and one thing that we haven't touched on, maybe we will in the next conversation too, is you know, so there's these two different cycles, or there's one main cycle every 6,000 years, but every other cycle, so every 12,000 years, it's especially bad because it is believed that the every other cycle, the magnetic protection layer around the planet, I can't remember what you called it,
Magnetosphere. Yeah.
magnetosphere, sort of like flickers out while it's in transition, and then the storms that are on the sun, the power of those rays basically just melt all of the metal on the planet.
Yeah, I've seen that theory floating around as well. I think that some people are probably just trying to do their best to design bunkers using no metal
Uh-huh.
whatsoever.
Right.
I'm guessing others are not, and they're going to try and make it as robust as they can. And
Yeah.
if the metal melts, the metal melts, and oh well, they're
Right.
not going to be the survivors. But
Yeah.
I'm guessing that there's going to be a diversity of manners in which people attempt to make their way through this if it does indeed happen. So,
Hmm.
and this kind of does a really good job of describing like why punctuated equilibrium happens. If every layer of every strata of the Earth is a layer of flood silt from one of these events,
Yeah.
then it makes sense that all of the animals from a given species would be the same in that layer.
Yeah. Right.
But the next layer, you think about how if you were to starve a child who is in their formative developmental years, that child would probably wind up with some stunted growth. I mean, scientists know this with other species testing them. So, like, you think about the goat-sized beavers that they found on the new Siberian island.
Sure.
Well, we don't have goat-sized beavers anymore. They're a lot smaller.
Yeah.
Likewise, there is evidence that humans were giants in the past, and we're not giants anymore. So, like, maybe that's a result of the scarcity of food. It would be pretty much slim pickings on the other side of one of these events for a little while, and you might have to go through some malnourishment phases, and your initial generations of offspring might suffer through some of that too, until society could kind of kickstart things again. That, which, by the way, seems to be explained by, you know, all of the ancient civilizations, Mesopotamia, China, right? The Tigris and Euphrates, right? What else? India. There's one more. I'm failing to grab. Maybe it's Africa, but they all seem to emerge about 6,000 years ago.
Yeah. Right.
That's awful weird.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe that was just the survivors who, you know, were able to eventually find one another and band together and be like, hey, you guys want to restart that society thing? That sucked a lot less than this whole hunter-gatherer thing we've been doing for the last 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I just can't help but think, like, if you imagine if you were an alien and you were, you know, just traveling throughout the galaxy, and you're like, oh, that's planet Earth. Place is beautiful, it's awesome, but it's got a big glitch in it every 12,000 years where it just goes to shit. You know?
It's like hurricane season in some of the tropical islands, right? You got to go when the timing is right.
Yeah, right, exactly. But it is also interesting that, you know, we as a civilization have sort of at least been estimated to kind of reach a peak as far as the number of people that are on this planet. And I believe, as we've discussed, that we choose to come here. You know, so if there are 8 billion souls, or, I mean, some people say that there are NPCs but still, if there are the most number of people that we believe have ever been, at least in recorded history, accepted recorded history, which probably throw in that, I think it's for a reason. I think that we chose to come here to experience, you know, this time on the planet. And, you know, maybe an optimistic way to look at it is that we having a greater view of exactly what is going to happen, you know, we being the true gods, each of us being the true gods of this reality, and just not realizing it. We knew coming into it that we weren't just coming here to die in some giant apocalypse, you know. So there is, you know, potentially Earth is breaking out of this cycle.
Very much agree with that. Both Dolores Cannon's work and the Law of One validate what you just said. And, you know, it's like, well, there's a lot of opportunities here now. So even if this does happen, that in and of itself is like the opportunity to beat the final boss in the video game, right? What an opportunity that is to try and, you know, beat that and make it through to the other side, if that's in fact what's going to happen, which I don't know, but like I said, I think there's a reasonable amount of evidence that it might. And if that's the case, this is why one of my goals is to try and preserve my research. And a lot of physical books. I mean, I stacked well over 200, probably 250 books in the last 2 to 3 years as I've been on this research bender. And I'd like to, you know, almost build a new Alexandria library, but do it in a high elevation, Rocky Mountain kind of bunker type of location where it could potentially be like a time capsule or something that some future Indiana Jones could find. And it wouldn't just have like my research on, you know, that we've covered so far, or the stuff that we're gonna cover. It would also have stuff in there like a bunch of books on energy healing methods like Qigong and Reiki, or how to cut wood in certain ways, like to get the Japanese joints where you don't need metallurgy in order to do joining and stuff, or how to select good wood for this project or that project, or how to propagate seeds, or just how to build windmills or water mills. Anything that could potentially be useful to a society, we don't know how far back they might get reset and what could be useful to them at that time.
Yeah.
So just trying to pass a football forward through time and give, and even if it doesn't happen, okay, cool. Now there's like this cool library up in the Rocky Mountains that people can go visit.
Yeah, for sure.
And
so do you think this is why, similarly, like why they buried Gobekli Tepe? That's kind of the theory, is that it looks like Gobekli Tepe was purposely buried.
I'm not sure if it was purposefully buried, maybe, because we do know that there are numerous places where there are underground systems, whether they be cavernous systems, like systems of caves, or something else entirely, where people could have been housed underground for significant periods of time. I am prone to think that Gobekli Tepe was covered by successive strata of flood silt in these various events, and that like you'll see on social media people posting images or videos of some incredibly ornate architectural structure that looks like it must have been chiseled from within rock. Like they must have carved all these rooms out of a giant chunk of rock or something.
Yeah.
Which seems kind of absurd to me. It seems more likely that they built these buildings a long time ago, and then these buildings got buried under successive layers of flood silt, which then ossified into stone. And that it became difficult to see where the surrounding stone stopped and the architectural structure began.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting.
Could be wrong.
Yeah,
it's all speculation, though.
For sure. I mean, at a certain point, I guess a lot of it is speculation, because you just don't know for sure. You can only see where the different observations point.
One of the reasons that I want to cover this topic is because going forward in future content, I'm going to want to get into like lost civilizations, and this subject leads very cleanly into the subject of lost civilizations, as it offers us a means to consider how civilizations could have been lost. And then when we're talking about lost civilizations, now we're talking about these common starting points from which the various sort of tribes of Earth, spawned. And this is going to explain why there are such similar symbols of significance, whether they be religious or astronomical or whatever, that are distributed thousands of miles apart from one another, but they're exactly the same for all practical purposes. It's going to describe, hopefully, how words, specific words, but also like almost entire languages, seem to be so closely related. There's a lot that this leads through in a particular order. So it's definitely not meant to be doomy and gloomy or fear-inducing by any stretch. Purely meant to be informative, somewhat speculative, but like I said, by the end of all this content, hopefully what becomes clear is the idea that, okay, there's a lot of sources that converge in hugely significant ways, and not just on this subject, but on other subjects, and all of those sources converging on the same set of subjects.
Yeah.
Wow, is that some strong signal in a world full of increasing noise?
Right. Yep. Yep. 100%. So then, what do we have to look forward to in the next conversation?
In the next conversation, I think we'll get into some more of the nuts and bolts of the pull flip mechanism. We'll kind of go back through a lot of those mysteries, those weird things that I went through near the end of the I guess, prepared portion of today's show. And depending on how much time we have, I'd ideally like to get into one ancient lost civilization not called Atlantis. It's one that doesn't usually get as much love or attention, but it's definitely out there for those seeking it.
Very cool. Okay, sounds good. Well, I look forward to our next one, and yeah, I appreciate your time this evening, and
well, I appreciate the opportunity and your time and attention and your meaningful feedback on everything I've shared.
Yeah, of course. So I look forward